Trinidad is Cuba's best preserved colonial town, with the old part being a UNESCO heritage site since 1988. Trinidad's old city centre area around Plaza Mayor was built back when the region was rich from sugar plantation wealth. Yet you'll still find the same churches, green spaces and mansions which had been previously built and owned by the sugar barons, now fully restored and transformed into museums. The locals often gather on doorsteps and street curbs, hiding from the relentless sun. You may see games of dominoes or chess or people in deep conversation. While in the street or local market, vendors are selling their wares, but some are more unique than others. For example, cars and bikes made from old pop cans. Trinidad is a small town. Wandering down the cobblestone side streets, you'll see brightly painted pastel-coloured houses in yellows, blues and pinks with red terracotta roofs. There are many forms of transport, from bikes, carts and donkeys, including Trinidad's famous Donkey Man, alongside the vintage American cars, surrounded by the beautiful colonial architecture. And finally, buses. Or are they trains? They look so similar. In the early 19th century, the Valle de los Ingenios, a series of 3 interconnected valleys about 12 kilometers outside of Trinidad, was the center of sugarcane production. Huge fortunes were amassed for the owners, who were using slave labor and the first steam mechanized mills. By 1850, the sugar industry accounted for 4/5 of all exports, and in 1860, Cuba produced nearly 1/3 of the world's sugar. The months between November and April is the dry season, when the sugarcane is harvested and there is plenty of work. But in the rainy season, there isn't much to do in the cane fields. Valle de los Ingenios is also known as the Valley of the Sugar Mills and is a World Heritage Site with many historic sugarcane mills. After harvesting the cane, it was transported by rail to factories for further processing and then to the port for export. The Soviets were Cuba's chief trading partner and had effectively sheltered Cuba's sugar industry with large subsidies for 30 years. With the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, the subsidies disappeared. Sugar could not be sold at a profit and the industry fell into severe decline. Today the trains are used for tourism and journeys should take about 30 minutes, leaving Trinidad around 9:30 in the morning and returning around 2 p.m. However, it is known for not being too reliable. Just outside Trinidad, there is a national park called Natural Topes de Collantes, where there are good hiking trails to be found. At Sendero Huellas de la Historia, it is possible to walk the marked trail along paths with hanging bridges. It is a well-designed route, leading you to the refreshing Salto de Javiera waterfall. It's possible to swim behind the cascading water into the cave. On the return trip, look out for local charcoal production. It takes 2 weeks to create the charcoal. The burning is controlled by starting it at the top of the pole, which in turn burns downwards and then outwards. The Mimosa pudicea species is known by numerous common names, including sensitive plant, humble plant, or shame plant, or touch-me-not. It is well known for its rapid plant movement. The leaflets close when stimulated by touching, warming, blowing, or shaking. Camaguey is Cuba's 3rd largest city and has managed to retain much of its colonial heritage. The city was planned in a deliberately irregular and confusing pattern, hoping to disorient any would-be invaders. It made it easier to defend, given that there is only one entry-exit point from the city. However, locals dispute this reasoning as a myth, asserting that in truth the city developed without planning. Camaguey's most impressive colonial church has a gold-plated altar with a statue of the Virgin Mary and can be traced back as far as 1748. There is an active convent in the attached cloister. Its history is imbued with legend. Local myth tells of a miraculous figure that floated from the watery depths here in 1601. Like many towns in Cuba, after many years of neglect, there are signs of investment in the infrastructure. It's literally changing overnight. In the renovated Plaza del Carmen, there is a Baroque church surrounded by well-kept houses, restaurants and art gallery. It's also complete with bronze statues of local characters, including a statue of a man reading a newspaper, and that man is actually sitting next to his statue reading a newspaper. Cuba's first commercial flights, radio and television broadcasts were made from Camaguey. In Camaguey we take a tour of the city by bicycle taxi. Cycling is a very popular form of transport in Cuba, and in the flatter cities bicycle taxis are very common. For tourists in Camaguey, it makes great sense to use them to navigate around the narrow and confusing street layouts. On our bike tour we visit the local farmers market. It is here where farmers are allowed to sell their food they produce after they have met the quota that they must sell to the state. The market in Camaguey is particularly busy and colourful. There are separate areas for produce sold by the state and for produce sold by the farmers directly to the public. There are plenty of interesting looking tropical fruits, vegetables and herbs. Garlic and onions are grown all year long. All that changes is their quality. This is also where the locals come to buy food once their monthly government provided food ration runs out. As well as fruit and vegetable section, there is also a meat market selling many different cuts of meat. Camaguey's main railway station was once a magnificent Spanish colonial-style two-storey building, but it is no more. The station counts as an important stop on the main Havana-Santiago line, even though it is single track and there is no electrification. The Cuban railway was originally built by the Spanish as a means to transport sugar cane to the ports, and this was at a time when the Spanish had yet to build a railroad in their own country. By 1958, Cuba had upgraded the original rolling stock to newer diesel trains, and the country held the record for most trackage per square mile in the world. But like everything else in Cuba, what was once state-of-the-art has fallen into disrepair. High maintenance costs and lack of materials make basic maintenance all but impossible. The line from Havana to Santiago de Cuba is one of the last remaining in use, a testament to its importance to mobility in the country. Today the train can contain an array of rail cars largely from Germany, Canada, France, China and the former USSR, mostly second-hand and refurbished carriages. Don't expect Western standards on the trains. Take your own toilet paper and allow for the odd breakdown. Think of it as part of the Cuba experience. The station lies in the middle of the city and just in front of the Hotel Plaza. And even at this major station there are no level crossing gates. When the freight train arrives, it slows to receive papers and then continues on its journey, whilst the road users wait patiently for it to pass by. A government ration book was introduced in 1962 as a temporary measure, but still exists today. Each family nominates one representative to look after the book, which contains a family reference number and everyone's name and date of birth. There is a page for each month where the clerk marks the products that were withdrawn and in which quantities. Rations vary according to age, gender and health, and can only be collected at your nominated local bodega or convenience store. Products distributed through the system are sold at subsidised prices, which have been kept more or less stable since its inception. Just like salaries. There is an allowance of 1 loaf per person per day and 7 kilograms of rice per person per month. 1 tube of toothpaste per family per month. You don't get milk or soap anymore, even though they are still in the book. This system means that there are sometimes long queues for the food. Cuban state salaries average just $30 a month, so in order to supplement earnings, people often have second jobs, such as selling chocolate or fruit to tourists. Many people set up to sell to fellow Cubans, fruit juices, roadside banana vendor or bicycle taxi. In Camaguey we came across a couple of people who set themselves up dancing in the local square outside the railway station. Everyone seemed to enjoy the entertainment and handed over some money. It was going well until the police came and moved them on. Since 1997, the Cuban government has allowed residents to rent rooms out to tourists. They are called Casa particulares and come in all shapes and sizes and conditions. This is the most common form of accommodation in Cuba. They are private homestays, very similar to bed and breakfasts. Here you'll stay in a local Cuban's house, have your own room, private bath and typically home-cooked Cuban meals. They can be recognised by a small sign on the door and 2 blue triangles against a white background, which the owners obtain after having paid a fixed per room annual tax. While some of these have been modernised, others are just starting out on the journey to cater for the higher standards of foreign visitors. Some offer antique furnishings, and the mix of old and new can strike you as rather quirky. A stay in a private casa allows tourists more opportunity to mix with local Cubans and engage in Cuban cultural life. A converted flat roof makes a great place to eat breakfast, but the access stairs can be rather steep. Hotels are owned and run by the government, like the one in Camaguey. Our hotel in the centre of town, its facilities include ensuite bathroom, a restaurant and bar, but no water and air conditioning that makes the room warmer. Even one of the top hotels in Havana, the Hotel Mercure Sevilla, looks impressive, but requires attention to the roof which leaks in heavy rain. And then there's the special American hotel. José Martí was a Cuban national hero and important figure in the Latin American literature world. During his life as a writer and through his political activity, he became a symbol for Cuba's bid for independence against the Spanish in the 19th century. He died in military action during the Battle of Dos Rios on May 19, 1895. Martí's mausoleum is 24 metres high and lies upon earth from every country in Latin America, and where in a perpetual way falls a sunbeam of light onto his tomb. After his death, one of his poems from the book Simple Verses was adapted to the song Guantanamera, which has become the definitive patriotic song of Cuba. Emilio Bacardi is the son of Facundo Bacardi, the founder of the Bacardi Distilling Company. The changing of the guard around his mausoleum happens every half an hour. Thomas Estrada Palmer served as the first president of Cuba between 1902 and 1906. The cemetery at Santa Ifigenia is a reminder of the past and present Cuban history, a place where Cuba's national heroes have been laid to rest. The cemetery has memorials to the independence wars, Cuban artists and the Cuban culture. There are many big vaults built from granite, marble and other valuable materials. However, where the descendants have left Cuba, some of the memorials have fallen into disrepair. More recently, the death of Fidel Castro on the 25th of November 2016 The commander-in-chief of the Cuban Revolution was cremated and his remains interred in a private ceremony. Hasta la victoria, ever onwards to victory.